Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling, well, one of those topics that never seems to get old,
Yeah.
the JFK assassination.
Right.
You sent over a collection of articles from Fair Play magazine,
Yes.
issue #34, do beep your
That's
stencils. And it's packed with, well, a lot of really intriguing theories and analysis.
It's amazing, how this event, even decades later, still captures our imagination and fuels debate. Fair Play itself, for listeners who might not know, is a publication that is dedicated to examining the evidence and raising questions about the JFK assassination. And this issue that we're looking at is from May, June 2000, so it shows these discussions are very much still alive.
Yeah, it really speaks to how deeply this event impacted people.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we're going to try to extract those key arguments and fascinating details from these articles, give you a glimpse into the world of, well, JFK conspiracy theories.
Right.
And trust me, there are some real twists and turns ahead.
Absolutely. We'll be looking at arguments about whether Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, the possibility of multiple shooters, and even potential involvement of organized crime or government agencies. It gets pretty intense.
Okay, so let's jump right in with an article that really sets the stage for this whole conversation. It's called The Tale of the Tapes
Right.
by Vincent Salandria. Now, this article draws a parallel between the JFK assassination and the Watergate scandal. Remember those infamous missing
Right,
tapes?
those 18.5 minutes that brought down a president.
Exactly.
Well, in the JFK case, we're talking about a whopping 5.5 hours of missing audio recordings from Air Force One on November 22, 1963, the day of the assassination.
5.5 hours. What could possibly be on those tapes that someone wanted to keep hidden?
Well, according to reports from several sources, including journalist Theodore White and former press secretary Pierre Salinger, these tapes contain conversations that suggested that some people knew Oswald was the presumed assassin before any official investigation had even begun.
That's pretty shocking, isn't it? I mean, shouldn't the investigation determine who the assassin was, not the other way around?
Exactly. And Salandria, the author of this article, really goes to great lengths trying to get his hands on these tapes. He reaches out to people like Noam Chomsky, very prominent intellectual and activist, Robert Balmer, who was the archivist of the United States at the time. He even contacts Pierre Salinger directly. These weren't just random people. These were figures who might have had insight into these missing recordings.
And what happened? Did he get anywhere?
Unfortunately, not really. He hit roadblocks every step of the way. The tapes were either declared lost or deemed unreleasable for various reasons.
Wow, talk about adding fuel to the conspiracy fire. It almost makes you think there's something they really didn't want people to hear.
And remember, Douglas P. Horn. He worked on the Assassination Records Review Board, the ARRB, a group tasked with reviewing and releasing government documents related to the assassination. Well, Horn later confirmed the existence of these missing tapes, and even stated that they could be crucial in proving that powerful institutions might have been involved in the assassination.
So if missing tapes brought down Nixon and Watergate, it makes you wonder what these 5.5 hours could reveal about the JFK assassination.
Right, yeah.
Okay, on to the next article, which focuses on a rather specific detail in the iconic Moorman photo, the one capturing the moment of the assassination.
Right.
This was called #5Man Revisited, and is written by John Keelan.
Yeah, this article actually follows up on a previous piece in Fair Play that received some criticism for its claims about a mysterious figure in the Moorman photo, dubbed #5Man. Some believe this figure could be another person involved in the assassination.
So is Keelan backing down from this theory?
Actually, no. He doubles down on the idea, explaining how he scanned the Moorman photo using advanced techniques to highlight the #5Man figure. Believes that this process provides even more evidence to support the theory.
And he even mentions that a photo expert at the Jet Propulsion Lab back in 1967 supported the interpretation of the figure as a man.
Wow.
So while this might seem like a small detail, it could potentially challenge the idea that Oswald acted alone.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to an article that brings up, well, a rather chilling aspect of the JFK assassination, the experiences of witnesses. This one is called A Legacy of Fear, written by Gary Richard Schooner. And it was originally intended for a major magazine in the late 1970s, but it was never published.
That's interesting. A major magazine refusing to publish an article about fear surrounding the JFK assassination makes you wonder why.
Yeah.
So in this article, where Schooner reveals documented instances of witnesses being pressured, threatened, and even physically harmed after the assassination, it paints a very disturbing picture of what happened to those who dared to speak out or share what they saw.
Right.
So he's not just talking about speculation or rumors, but actual documented cases.
Exactly. He discusses specific examples, like Aquila Clemens, who witnessed the shooting of Officer J.D. Tippit, a key event that happened shortly after the assassination. She received threats warning her to stay silent about what she saw.
And then there's the case of Wilma Tice, who claimed to have seen Jack Ruby, the man who shot Oswald, at Parkland Hospital right after the assassination. And she experienced relentless harassment, even finding a 12-foot ladder mysteriously propped up against her back door.
And Schooner also delves into the numbers game surrounding the deaths of witnesses connected to the assassination. While it's hard to prove a direct link between these deaths and the events of that day, the sheer number of suspicious deaths raises some serious questions. He argues that even if a single death could be definitively linked to the assassination or its investigation, wouldn't that be cause for alarm?
Right, and considering Oswald was already dead, who was behind these threats and intimidation tactics?
It's a chilling thought, isn't it?
It is.
And Schooner himself recounts an experience that really adds to this sense of unease. He was interviewing a witness who was pressured by the FBI to change her story. This raises the question of whether government agencies might have been involved in silencing witnesses or manipulating the narrative.
So we're seeing a potential pattern here. Missing tapes, witness intimidation, and a possible attempt to control the flow of information. It's starting to feel like we're uncovering something much bigger than just a lone gunman.
Yes, and this theme of potential government cover-ups is something we'll see echoed in the next article we discuss. But first, let's shift gears a bit and talk about an event that at first glance might seem unrelated to the JFK assassination, the Waco siege.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at A Tale of Two Tales by Gerald Smith, an article that contrasts two documentaries about this tragic event. One is called Waco, The Inside Story, and the other is Waco, The Rules of Engagement.
For those who might not be familiar, the Waco siege was a 1993 standoff between the Branch Davidians, a religious group, and federal agents. And these two documentaries offer vastly different perspectives on the events that unfolded.
So we're not just talking about two different interpretations of the same event, but two completely different narratives.
Exactly. The Rules of Engagement focuses on the initial raid by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms ATF, and the potential for government overreach. It questions whether the government's actions were justified and whether they ultimately escalated the situation.
And what about The Inside Story? What's its take?
Well, this documentary picks up after the initial ATF raid, and it frames the Davidians as the guilty party from the start.
Go, yeah.
It portrays them as a dangerous cult and David Koresh, their leader, as a manipulative figure.
Wow, so it's a classic case of history is written by the victors.
That's a good way to put it. And Smith does a great job of analyzing how these two contrasting narratives shape public perception of what happened at Waco. He points out that the media played a crucial role in amplifying certain viewpoints while downplaying others.
So already we're seeing parallels with the JFK assassination, right?
Mm.
The idea of media manipulation, conflicting accounts, and the difficulty of separating fact from fiction.
Precisely. And there's more. What's really striking is that the Davidians actually tried to engage the media directly during the siege. They even hung a banner pleading, "God help us, we want the press."
It makes you wonder if an unbiased media presence could have changed the course of events, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And Smith goes on to highlight some jaw-dropping discrepancies between what the negotiators claimed was happening and what the Davidians actually witnessed. For instance, the Davidians reported seeing a tank crushing a structure on their property, but the negotiators denied having any knowledge of such an action.
And then there was the incident where the Davidians reported that agents were mooning their compound, dropping their pants and flashing them. Again, the negotiators deny this ever happened.
It really paints a picture of a chaotic and potentially out-of-control operation. And then, of course, there's the final assault with CS gas, the fire that engulfed the compound, and the conflicting narratives about who started it.
Right. The FBI claimed to have evidence that the Davidians set the fires themselves, while the rules of engagement includes infrared footage that shows explosions happening at the back of the compound just before the fire erupted.
And remember, the FBI also insisted they hadn't fired a single shot during the entire siege. But this infrared footage captured heat signatures consistent with automatic weapons fire directed at the compound.
So, again, we have evidence that directly contradicts the official story. It's starting to feel like we're seeing a familiar pattern here. What starts as a simple investigation quickly becomes a web of conflicting accounts, hidden evidence, and potential government misconduct.
Yes, and this sense of unease only deepens when we delve into Smith's follow-up article, Whackmer.
Yeah, and that's where this next article really digs deep. It's Gerald Smith's follow-up piece titled Wackermer, which, by the way, was the FBI's code name for the Waco investigation,
Okay.
short for Waco murders.
So right from the title, we get a sense that this is going to be a pretty intense look at the FBI's role in this whole event.
Absolutely. Smith draws on a book called The Bureau, Inside the Modern FBI, to shed light on the FBI's perspective and mindset at the time. The book argues that after the controversial era of J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI was trying to reinvent its image and prove its effectiveness.
So they had something to prove, and Waco became their proving ground.
In a way, yes. And the book portrays the Davidians as a dangerous cult and David Koresh as a potentially unstable, self-styled messiah. This framing really influenced how the public perceived the events at Waco.
It's interesting how the narrative can be so powerful. If you frame a group as a dangerous cult, it's easier to justify taking extreme measures against them. Exactly. Now, Smith also points out the ambiguity surrounding the child abuse claims that were used to justify the use of CS gas against the Davidians. Remember, this was a key factor in the decision to launch the final assault that led to the tragic fire.
So were these child abuse claims substantiated?
Well, that's where it gets murky. Smith mentions that Janet Reno, who was the attorney general at the time, admitted that the child abuse allegation was old and not necessarily relevant to the situation at hand.
Wait, so they used an old, possibly irrelevant allegation to justify a raid that resulted in the deaths of dozens of people. That's incredibly disturbing.
It is, and what's even more troubling is that neither Frontline, a reputable investigative journalism program, nor the authors of the Bureau could identify the source of this child abuse information that was given to Janet Reno.
So we have a crucial piece of information that was used to justify a major operation, but no one seems to know where it came from. That's a huge red flag, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Absolutely. It raises serious questions about the legitimacy of the entire operation. Now, Smith also delves into the FBI's cooperation with the author of the Bureau, suggesting that this close relationship might have influenced how the events at Waco were portrayed in the book.
So we might even be dealing with some bias in the very source that claims to give an inside look at the FBI.
It's a possibility we have to consider. Now remember, Smith was writing this article in 1999, so he also touches upon some of the recent developments at the time. For example, John Danforth was appointed to lead an independent re-examination of the Waco siege.
So even years later, the controversy surrounding Waco hadn't gone away.
Right. And then the FBI drops a bombshell. They admit to using pyrotechnic devices near the Davidian compound during the siege.
Hold on, I thought they maintained they hadn't used any such devices.
That's what they claimed for years. But now they were admitting to using these devices, which are essentially incendiary rounds that can start fires. This directly contradicted their previous statements and raised even more questions about their actions.
Wow. It's like the truth is slowly unraveling bit by bit.
And it doesn't stop there. The Texas Rangers, who were also investigating the Waco siege, discovered potential evidence of automatic weapons fire directed at the Davidian compound. And guess who those shots might have come from?
The FBI. But they swore they never fired a single bullet.
Exactly. This completely shattered their long-held claim and fueled suspicions that they might have been involved in a cover-up. Smith ends his article with a cynical editorial by Gary Wills, who compares the Danforth Commission to the Warren Commission, implying that it might be another attempt to protect powerful institutions rather than uncover the truth.
So we're seeing a pattern here. Whether it's the JFK assassination or the Waco siege, it seems like there's a real struggle to get to the bottom of what actually happened. And those in power might not be so eager to let the truth come out.
It's a sobering thought. Now let's shift gears back to the JFK assassination and take a closer look at one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence, the Zapruder film.
Ah, the Zapruder film.
Mm-hmm.
For those who might not know, this is the whole movie that captured the assassination as it happened.
Right. And Vincent Salandria, in his article, Life magazine and the Warren Commission, focuses on this very film. This article is especially fascinating because it was written back in 1966 when the Zapruder film was still under the control of Life magazine and hadn't been released to the public.
So Salandria was working with limited access to this crucial piece of evidence.
Exactly. But he was one of the first to analyze the shots, trajectories, and wounds in the JFK assassination. And he concluded, based on the available evidence, that there had to be multiple assassins.
Multiple assassins. That directly contradicts the Warren Commission's findings, right?
Absolutely. And Salandria uses the Zapruder film to support his argument. He specifically focuses on frames 313 and 316. Now, frame 313 shows Kennedy at the very instant of the fatal headshot, while 316 shows him just a fraction of a second later.
Okay, and what does he see in these frames that points to multiple shooters?
Well, he sees evidence suggesting a shot from the front and right of President Kennedy, which contradicts the Warren Commission's finding that all shots came from the rear, specifically from the Texas School Book Depository building, where Oswald was allegedly positioned.
So if the fatal shot came from the front, that means someone else besides Oswald had to have fired it.
Exactly. And Salandria argues that the force and direction of Kennedy's head movement in those frames just don't align with the lone gunman theory. He points out that the president's head is snapped back and to the left, indicating a shot from the front, specifically from the grassy knoll area.
The grassy knoll. That's always been a hotbed for conspiracy theories.
Right. And Salandria was one of the first to use the Zapruder film to back up this theory. He criticized the Warren Commission for completely ignoring this crucial piece of evidence, which he believed pointed to a much larger conspiracy.
Now, this is all happening while the Zapruder film is still under wraps, right? It's amazing how Salandria was piecing this together without full access to the footage.
Yeah, it really is. He also goes on to call for the release of missing X-rays and photographs of President Kennedy's body that were taken at Bethesda Naval Hospital after the assassination.
Why were these X-rays and photos so important?
Well, Salandria believed they held key information about the president's wounds and the trajectory of the bullets. He felt this evidence, along with the Zapruder film, was crucial to uncovering the truth.
But they were never released, were they?
No, and Salandria was concerned that the government might even forge or manipulate these materials if they were ever made public. He saw the Zapruder film as the most reliable piece of evidence because it had already been scrutinized by researchers at the National Archives and was less likely to be tampered with.
So it's like he's laying out a case for a massive cover-up, a concerted effort to suppress evidence that contradicts the official story.
Exactly. He ends his article with a powerful call for Life magazine to release the Zapruder film to the public, arguing that it would expose the Warren Commission's findings as fraudulent.
Wow, that's a bold statement. So far, we've seen evidence of missing recordings, intimidated witnesses, conflicting accounts, and now the suppression of crucial evidence, like the Zapruder film and the autopsy photos.
Right.
It's hard to ignore the possibility that something much bigger might be at play here.
Absolutely. And this public distrust in the official narrative is something we see reflected in John Kalin's article, The Warren Support.
Yeah, and it really is fascinating how, despite all the official statements and reports backing up the lone gunman theory, most people still aren't buying it.
So even with all that, they're just not convinced.
That's right. Kalin actually cites a USA Today, CNN Gallup poll in his article that really highlights this. They found that a whopping 86% of respondents in the 1829 age group believe there was a conspiracy in JFK's death. And the numbers don't drop significantly across older age groups either.
86%. That's a pretty overwhelming majority, wouldn't you say?
It absolutely is. It's really quite remarkable how this distrust has persisted despite, countless books, documentaries, official statements supporting the Warren Commission's conclusions. Almost seems like the more the official story is pushed, the less people believe it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. And Killen does acknowledge that efforts to find, an alternative truth have been largely fruitless, but he emphasizes Fair Play magazine's commitment to continuing the search and challenging the official narrative, which many see as, flawed, if not outright fraudulent.
It's a good reminder that the search for truth is an ongoing process, and we should never stop questioning what we're told, especially when it comes to events of this magnitude. Now, before we finish up, I want to touch on a few more intriguing items for this issue of Fair Play. It's like a grab bag of JFK-related curiosities.
Absolutely, yeah.
In the miscellanea, errata, etc. section, we find everything from movie announcements to encyclopedia excerpts. One item that caught my eye was the announcement of a new film called Nobody Knows. And get this, it's about a time traveler who goes back to 1963 to try to prevent the JFK assassination.
I wonder if they consulted Fair Play for historical accuracy.
Right. Fascinating concept, though, isn't it? A fictional take on a historical event that still sparks so much debate, so much speculation. Makes you think about all the what-ifs surrounding that fateful day.
Speaking of fictional takes, there's also gossip about a potential TV adaptation of Pat Lambert's book, False Witness. And this book is actually quite critical of Jim Garrison, the New Orleans district attorney who famously investigated a conspiracy in the JFK assassination, and also Oliver Stone's film, JFK, which was based on Garrison's investigation.
So this book is basically challenging the narrative presented by both Garrison and Stone.
Yes, it's a controversial book, with some calling it a hatchet job on both figures, but it does represent, a different perspective on the assassination and the investigations that followed.
And then we have an item that's almost meta in its approach. Fair Play includes an excerpt from the World Book Encyclopedia, the one we all used in school, summarizing both the Warren Commission's findings and the House Select Committee's conclusion that there was probably a conspiracy in JFK's death.
It's almost as if the encyclopedia itself is acknowledging that there's more to the story than the official narrative.
And to top it off, they even list additional resources for further reading. It's like they're encouraging readers to delve deeper and form their own conclusions.
Yeah, it's a very subtle but powerful nod to the complexity of this event and the ongoing search for answers. Now, for those who really want to go down the rabbit hole, Fair Play also mentions the availability of audio tapes and documents from the Assassination Records Review Board.
That's the group we mentioned earlier, the ARRB,
Yeah.
the one that was tasked with reviewing and releasing government documents related to the assassination.
Exactly. This is, a goldmine for anyone who wants to dig into the primary source material and potentially uncover new insights that were missed or overlooked in the official reports.
It's like a treasure trove for JFK researchers or anyone who's just fascinated by this event. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to share a piece of reader feedback that really stood out to me. It's a letter from Courtney Red, and they express surprise at the lack of media coverage about the Lloyd Jowers trial. This was related to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, yes, that trial was significant. Jowers was a Memphis cafe owner who claimed to have been part of a conspiracy to kill Dr. King.
Right. And the jury actually found Jowers liable for King's death. Yet, as Red points out, the trial received very little attention from, the mainstream media.
It's interesting how some events, even those with, significant legal outcomes, can get buried or downplayed in the media landscape.
Red also expresses skepticism towards Gerald Posner, who we mentioned earlier, a prominent defender of the lone gunman theory in the JFK assassination. And they find it hard to take Posner seriously, claiming his statements often contradict each other or can be easily refuted. It's a good reminder that we should always critically evaluate information, even when it comes from those who present themselves as experts.
Absolutely. And Red ends their letter by expressing a hope that there will be a similar effort to clear Oswald's name and uncover the truth about JFK's death, just as the Jowers trial shed light on the King assassination.
It's a sentiment that really echoes the core mission of Fair Play magazine: to keep searching for answers, to challenge the official narratives, and to never give up on the pursuit of truth, no matter how elusive it may seem.
So there you have it. We've taken you on a whirlwind tour through a single issue of Fair Play magazine, explored missing tapes, witness intimidation, conflicting accounts, and the enduring public distrust in the official narratives surrounding both the JFK assassination and the Waco siege.
We've seen how those in power might try to control the flow of information and how individuals, like Salandria, Schooner, and Smith, really dedicate themselves to challenging those narratives and searching for the truth.
So, what stood out to you as most compelling? Do you think we'll ever have definitive answers about these events? Is it even possible to find the truth when so much information is contested and shrouded in secrecy?
Here's a final thought to ponder. If fear and manipulation were at play in the JFK assassination and Waco, what other events might be obscured by similar forces? This deep dive has hopefully equipped you with the awareness to ask those questions and to continue your own exploration.
After all, as Fair Play reminds us, the American people are the ultimate jury in these cases, and the pursuit of truth is an ongoing responsibility. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of history's most enduring mysteries.